actually from Harry Belafonte. For those who are not aware, he did just pass away. He actually made a statement in reference to the Democratic Party. And he made this statement to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So I want you to hear what Harry Belafonte had to say to them about the Democratic Party.
The last thing Dr. King said to me before he was murdered, Martin said, you know, I sit here deeply concerned that I suspect we are leading our nation on an integration trip that has us integrating into a burning house. Most of the politicians I know of make promises only to walk into the places of power and then deny us. I guess part of the reason I'm here is to really look through the ravages of the Democratic Party and see if anything is really worth salvaging.
So that was the statement coming from Harry Belafonte. And I think that was important for people to see, because even back then he tried to warn people about the Democratic Party and where we could be heading. And there's another clip I want to play. If you haven't seen this one, hold on to your seats. Now, this is Bernie Sanders. This was just yesterday. And I want you to hear this statement made by Bernie Sanders, because I think this is very problematic, and that leads into the discussion that we're going to have today. So here we go.
I don't think one has many alternatives here. What's at stake is the future of American democracy. What's at stake is whether we have some right-wing demagogue running this country, or a pathological liar, or somebody who's trying to divide us up, or whether we re-elect somebody who is a very decent human being who's trying to do the opposite, trying to bring the American people together. Look, Chris, I think it is a surprise to nobody when I say that I disagree with Biden on many issues. But on the other hand, I think he deserves credit for what he has accomplished. And our job now as a progressive movement is to rally the people of this country to make sure that the next 4 years complete some of the efforts that have begun in the first administration. And that means we have to keep our eyes on the prize and understand that today, tens and tens of millions of working people are struggling and are in pain in the richest country in the history of the world. So while on one hand, the fight has got to be to protect women's right to control their own bodies, and we just heard a moment ago some of the implications of what right-wing policy has done to women. We have got to fight to protect democracy. On the other hand, we cannot lose track of the fact that over 60% of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck. Over 500,000 people are homeless. People can't afford health care, can't afford prescription drugs, can't afford to go to college, in many cases working for starvation wages. So we need an agenda that speaks to working people, that brings them together to say, hey, what about a government that works for us and not just the billionaires?
So here's the problem. Number one, of course, Bernie Sanders is supporting Joe Biden's re-election, which is not a surprise to me. But number two, all of those things that Bernie Sanders just complained about, the Democratic Party is not going to fix. And Bernie Sanders knows that. And this is one of the reasons why I say the Bernie Sanders movement is dead. So the question is, what do we do now? And that's something that people brought up to me on call-in. Obviously, both of you know that multiple times. Lucy and Roger actually have a different type of strategy, and I think everyone needs to listen to this. So I'm going to pass it to both of you, and I guess we can get started with the document from Roger.
All right, let me share. And this is actually, it's more really Roger's idea than mine. But basically, the reason I came around is, I actually canvassed for Bernie in 2020, which I greatly regret. And one of the things, like, I remember this, when somebody says something to you and you only remember it in retrospect because you weren't ready to listen to it at the time. Basically, what what somebody said to me was, like, I was trying to convince them to vote for Bernie, right? And they said to me, the founders never intended for us to break up into parties. I've been a history teacher for over 30 years, and this is just never going to work. And I just wasn't ready to listen to it at the time. But then I met Roger Meadows, and he likes to call himself a party abolitionist, and he had all of these ideas about how to do things on a local level, and it just clicked. I was like, this makes sense. It just makes sense. So this is his write-up.
Yeah, because it's important that we talk about solutions, because this is a big thing I'm hearing from people is like, what do we do next? I've talked about ballot initiatives multiple times on my channel, but not everyone lives in a ballot initiative state. So people are asking about like a national strategy. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to this. We really have to get people out of the Democratic Party. We got to get people actually out of both of these parties. We really have to.
I remember Kshama Sawant saying the path for progressives in the Democrat Party leads to a cemetery. I want to take that further and say the path toward getting what we want is not through politicians. Instead, it's through direct democracy, not really representative democracy. So my goal is I want to get at least 17 to 20 more states have the ability to place their own initiatives on the ballot to ratify their own amendments into their state constitution. When you get to anywhere between 34 to 38 states that are able to ratify their own amendments into their constitution. Now, what we're trying to do in New York is, I figured that if we were to register in blue areas, especially New York City, because I don't want to have people from, I want to be able to get people who are tired of the Democrat Party and who are left of the Democrat Party to register under no party. We call it no party, not independent. It's the same thing. No party in New York State. Okay. So I figured if we're able, let me see, there's about 6.5 million registered Democrats statewide. And there are 3.5 million registered no party, and about like 2.4 million Republicans, and they're leaving the state in droves. I figured if we're able to get the no party registered up to match a Democrat, we could create a safety net for lawmakers in their legislative districts to jump out of their party and become an independent, no party. Okay. More specifically, state lawmakers, because it's going to be state lawmakers that we're going to have to use that as leverage, so where they can push leadership from the outside to get them to put an amendment before us for ratification that would allow us to become a ballot initiative state, a citizen ballot initiative state, so we can place our own initiatives on the ballot to amend the state constitution. And we have to make sure that it is specifically for amending the state constitution. And the reason why I say that is because if it's only for law, like you see Alaska, Wyoming, Maine, Idaho, Washington, Utah, they're citizen ballot initiative states also, but they can't use the process to amend their state constitution, only pass laws, which means that if they pass something, the government can come in and just be like, oh, that's nice, we're getting rid of that, without having to ask their voters, unlike they would if it was an amendment to their state constitution. So I figured that, if we're able to get these, create these districts that are mostly independent and mostly left of the Democrat Party, is independent, that'll give them cover to be like, okay, I'm jumping out and then I'm pushing from the outside. Or if not, we'll just run, we'll run some independent candidates, so.
So one of the things that Lucy and Roger have done before is they've gone to these town hall events. Like one of the ones was AOC, one was like Jamal Bowman, and they actually had papers for people to register as an independent, for people to leave the Democratic Party. So it's one of those things where like you can't rely on people to go home and do it themselves. A lot of times people say they're going to do something when they get home, and then they get home and they get busy and it doesn't happen. So showing up to those events with the papers in hand is especially key. So the idea is to get people who are already Democrats. And one of the ways that you can get those people is doing what Lucy and Roger did, going to like those town hall events, like an AOC event or Jamal Bowman event, and asking people there to say, listen, like, what have they done for you in the community? Have they done anything for you? Why don't you leave the party? I have the papers here for you to register as an independent. The reason why this is very important and key is because this is something that mainstream media and both parties actually pay attention to. They pay attention to the number of voters that are registered for their party. So if we can get an influx of people to leave that party and go into, register as an independent, they're going to take note of that. They're going to see that people are leaving. So I think that's important. But I'll pass it to you, Lucy.
Basically, what we're trying to say is, like Roger said, there is 19.5 million people in New York State. Out of that, 11.5 million people live below Westchester County in New York City and Long Island suburbs, and 8 million upstate. So this is just for New York specifically. 13 to 14 million are registered to vote statewide. Out of all of that, 6.5 million are registered Democrat. 3.5 are registered under no party, and a little less than 2.5 are registered GOP, and they're leaving in droves. The goal is to match registered Democrats with registered no party who are left out of the Democratic Party.